Welcome, everybody. I'm Hadley,
I'm Maya.
and we are co-founders of Trini Tribe. We are super excited today. We're with our second guest of our Trini Talk, and we're with Kaitlin Bolt-Lovett, who is a registered dietitian who has, is it fairly recently, within the last several years, been back to Cincinnati now after tons of travel and experience. So we're really happy to have her back in our Cincy area, and just want to share some of the goodness that she has going on in her life. So Kaitlin, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. Nice.
Thanks. Yes. We were just talking right before this that it is like an absolutely glorious day here in Cincy, and I haven't been feeling like summer just kind of went on and on and on and on, and it was so hot, and I just was not ready to start eating kind of fall flavors. And it was just last night or something, I'm like, bring on all of the sage and the all of that delicious fall. So I'm sure you have amazing recipes and some fall things up your sleeve that you're ready to do.
We were definitely drooling over your Instagram page of just scrolling at each recipe. And Hadley, I totally agree. I've been feeling a little unmotivated to cook just because it's been one, cold in my apartment. I had the heat off yesterday, but that's another story. But just cold in general, I don't want to get out of my cozy little blanket on my couch and make food. So thankfully the nicer weather, a sunny day, can do wonders for your mood. But yeah, I agree, Hadley. I've been I'm going to go to the grocery. I'm going to get an acorn squash. What can I do with that? I don't know. I'll ask Kaitlin, but
yeah.
But I'm excited to learn more, not just about your food, but more about you.
Yay, awesome.
Yeah.
Well, it's so fun. It's interesting because I feel the same way, and it's funny, the acorn squash is it sounds like a great idea, and then you get it home and realize I actually have to cut this down, I have to bake it, I have to figure out how to actually make it taste good. And
yeah, sometimes it looks a lot prettier just sitting on the counter. All those squashes and gourds and all of that beautiful fall.
Exactly.
Yeah. So kind of leaning into that. So you have a pretty varied background in regards to cooking. And when I was looking over, your kind of about me page on your site, which I knew a little bit of your background, but then reading more thoroughly into it, I was like, okay, so you're synchronized swimmer, which was, pretty intense. Like you were saying, you're trying to get into the Olympics. Then you would go from that to being a pastry chef. Is that where you jump to next? Which is also a totally different level of intensity. Having worked in restaurants for a long, long time, I know the reality of that. And then you go from that to then yoga and more of this dietitian role. Not more of, you're a dietitian. So, how has tell a little bit more about that journey. What is, your kind of relationship with food, your relationship with yourself as that evolution has gone through your life?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a long and interesting journey for sure. And I have been fortunate, to have supportive parents who have kind of just let me hop around to whatever was next for me. So yeah, that's amazing. I started as a synchronized swimmer when I was 8, and went all the way through as a varsity athlete at Ohio State. And through that went out to California, came back. So it's been a really interesting journey food-wise for me. It definitely, I was hardcore into it. So I did want to go to the Olympics. I moved out to California for my junior and senior of high school for it. And with that, it's an intense sport, and it's a sport that you are judged in a lot of ways in what you look like and your body type, and you're constantly comparing to other people. So I always had an interest in food. I always loved food. I love research. So at the time, when I moved out to California, it was in that area of low fat phase, but also like starting to restrict carbs. So Atkins was huge and all of these things. And I'm an athlete in the pool for 8 hours a day. And I thought it would be a great time to start restricting, you know, my food intake. Great decisions. And you know, it things had started a long time before that, but I ended up with a sports-induced eating disorder my senior year of high school. And it was basically my way of controlling the environment. You know, I was out in California. My mom had moved out. My dad was there every other weekend. It was obviously an intense sport. I had a coach with eating issues herself. So it was this really crazy dynamic that was going on. And it's lasted with me for a long time. I went to college and then all of a sudden this whole world was opened up to me of eating whatever I want, the, you know, dining halls. And I started a pretty bad kind of binge restrict yo-yo kind of thing going on. And I was just looking at a picture of myself from sophomore year of college, and it's now I can look back and see the amount of inflammation and bloating and everything that was going on in my system. And I didn't have tools. I wasn't asking for help. I didn't know where to turn to, and I felt really alone and depressed. And it took me, you know, I have a weird, you know, I knew I loved food. I ended up deciding that I was done with college, done being an athlete. I was burnt out and needed to move on. So I stepped away from that, decided to go into the restaurant industry. So I started at an amazing pastry shop in Columbus, Ohio. And from then they kind of pushed me out to move to Chicago and go to pastry school. And then I started in the restaurant industry. And again, it was kind of, I went from one extreme to another extreme. I had no idea what balance was. I was used to being in a pool 8 hours a day. I homeschooled, and then I was going to work 90 hours a week in New York City. And you have to try very hard to find balance living there. So there I ended up working my way up to pastry sous chef. And through that, I found a studio in New York, and so grateful. I ended up doing my 200-hour yoga teacher training there. And it was a way for me. I don't think I was being, I kind of realized yet what I was really doing, but it was a way to ground me. And I knew it was a space that I needed. And so then 2 years in New York, I realized that I didn't want to be my pastry chef. I looked at his life, and it was not what I wanted for myself. I felt like I wasn't learning anymore, and that's something that I wanted to continue to do. So I, again, made a crazy leap and just moved back home, and decided that if I needed to go back to the place where I felt like I never fit in, I never was enough, and if I was going to do that, I needed to come back home. So with that, I ended up getting into doing another teacher training, an 11th month teacher training. And it was very introspective, and I wasn't ready for it. And it's interesting, all the tools I've taken with me the last couple years from that. And thank goodness for it. But that kind of pushed me into going back to school. And it's something that I always wanted to do. When I went to Ohio State as an athlete, I wanted to be a dietitian. But I didn't think I was good at school. I didn't have the best skills after homeschooling myself for 2 years. So I quickly realized that if you actually go to class and study, you tend to do better in college.
It also helps to enjoy like what you're learning too. I mean, like thus far, of course, with like differences, you're taking like pages out of my diary, basically out of like my life journal, as far as like the extreme athlete to then like total freedom release in college to then extreme restaurant life. So I totally feel you on all of those things. And then like the yoga journey, like that lands you back in that safe space. But yeah, it's pretty amazing. So I'm sorry. So continue back with your.
No, you're good. And it is so interesting how like, it's just like you're kind of drawn to the extremes, and then kind of then take a second and realize, whoa, you know, that's not what I'm going for. I'm doing the same thing in just a different pattern. And that for me, you know, school was, I wanted to go full on. I was proving something to myself, but I also only knew how to do it one way. And after about a year, and, you know, having a significant other that I was living with, who was basically like, you're miserable. If you're going to keep doing this, we need to figure out another way. I had to figure out how to find balance. And it was the first time that I had to take a step back, but continue on what I was doing. So I had to figure out other ways to cope. I had to, you know, realize that if I wasn't getting it 4.2 in every single class, that I was still going to pass my classes and get to where I needed to go. And through all of this, for me, I was still trying to restrict food, or go during the week and be really strict, and then, you know, binge on the weekends, or go out and drink all night. And it wasn't working. And it keeps bringing you back to those same patterns. And it took really within the last couple years of figuring out different tools to use so that I could start taking away some of that guilt and the shame that I have surrounded food with. Even though I have made my life around it, it was still had so much weight for me. And it really has taken the last couple of years to start to peel back those layers and to figure out what was really going on, what I'm, you know, trying to use food to cope with, to get to this point. And, you know, school is a great tool for me. I am so grateful to have those letters behind my name, if anything else. But I also, in a lot of ways, had to go into it and then erase a lot of what I learned. Because the schooling in the government and a lot of our rules are really behind the times science-wise. So as much as I love the science part and learning that part of it, I also had to let go of this other part that I just didn't agree with and didn't align with how I wanted to practice as a dietitian.
Sure. And also, I mean, there's a part of it, I know just from doing, you know, my own studies with, you know, like health coaching and nutrition, that like it's beautiful to have the science behind it, but then I'm sure as a dietitian, feeling like it doesn't really represent maybe the whole person all the time too. You know, so you can have like the macros of all of these things, but then like, what are like the psychological reasons? Like, what are those patterns that people are dealing with? Like, is it that sense of extreme that they're trying to cope with, or a sense of like lack of self-worth? So it sounds like you've had, you know, like your own version of that through that evolution of whether it was food or, you know, like the extremities that you were kind of going through. Do you see a lot? I feel like I've heard this a lot actually from other dietitians. Like they come out of school, it was like a really great situation, great program. They learned a lot, but then it was like, and what about the rest of the person? Do you feel like that's a common?
Absolutely. And I think you kind of, at least I and a couple other people that I've talked to, went into it a little bit blindly, the program. And I think there's so much that goes into actually getting to be a dietitian, you know, getting picked for your internships and then the actual exam and all this stuff afterwards. And I think it definitely was, I mean, I graduated, I passed my exam, and then it's, you know, it's like, now what? Because you aren't prepared for that part. And there's really only, you can go into a hospital, you can go into long-term care. And those are really the biggest areas where dietitians go into. Otherwise you kind of have to feel your way. And if you want to go in another way, then usually using those, I mean, big statistics and things that we used in school don't necessarily work for everybody. And
Right.
I think that's the difficult piece is, you know, in this day and age, we're still looking for that magic pill, or we're still, you know, everybody jumps on the bandwagons because it's, you know, it worked for one person and then this other person, but maybe you have a whole different, you know, set of needs and your body's working differently. And that's where it gets a little sticky.
100%. I know from when Maya and I were coming together and just talking about starting this program and Trini Tribe and, you know, what that's going to look like. One of the things that we kept on coming back to is that we never wanted to be dogmatic in our approach and our language and the way that we kind of look and talk about wellness. You know, whether that's movement or food or, you know, all of the different kind of layers within that bubble of wellness, just because of our own experience of like, you know, maybe going on more of that dogmatic path and then kind of having to like, be like, whoa, that doesn't quite feel right for me. Like what does feel right? And then also knowing that, yes, like we are all, like we can all look the same, you know, have maybe like the same body type, but then internally, do you have like digestive issues? Are you getting enough sleep? Like, what's your relationship with your partner, with your family? Are there's like external stressors? Like, holy shit, there can be so many different things.
Yeah,
and so to just, you know, to be like, this is the only way, and this is how you should do something. And, you know, it's just, I just hate that language so much.
I feel like there is a lot out there where people most likely get confused on what's best for them. If it's something that is dogmatic and it's just like, well, do this because everyone is saying it's the best way to go, or the best diet, if you will. How do you feel about like all these, you know, certain type of diets, like paleo diet's the best for inflammation or for anxiety or for, you know, losing weight? Or how do you feel about kind of those different type of diets, if you will, or even the word diet? Like, how does that make you feel?
Mm-hmm. How does that land with you?
Well, the hard part is, and I hate that, like there's literally diet in my description. Like I'm a dietitian, you know, you say what it is and people already are like, oh man. And I'm like, no, really, it's okay. But that's a great question, because I and this is part of the practice of me figuring out how I want to practice and what I feel aligned with. And for me, it is that gray area. And a lot of people don't want to hear that. You know, it's a lot easier to have the black or the white, or to say, this is your meal plan. This is what you're supposed to do. Eat these 5 foods. Don't eat these.
Yeah, people want all of the guesswork taken out of them, like taken out for them. And they just want to know like how to do it quickly, how to do it easy, and how can I do it in a cheap manner? And you're like, well, I'm going to try to work with you on those things. However, it's not always like just that black and white. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's also, you know, what's going to be sustainable, because again, diets don't tend to be sustainable. What are you trying? It's like, it's always, you know, how do you make a lifestyle change? And to, you know, again, it's with the diets, you know, things like paleo are great. I love the idea of coming back to more wholesome foods, eating more natural, less processed. I think if anything, that would be the most dogmatic I'm going to get, is saying we could all benefit from more whole foods. We can all benefit from eating less processed foods.
Right.
But to put somebody in that box, I just don't think it's realistic. Yeah. And I think it's not realistic maybe for a couple months. You know, it's fall time. Maybe paleo is a good time for you to try it out and see what you think. But then you have to do the work and you can use somebody as well to help you through it, but figure out what did work for you using that, what didn't work for you, and start to piece it apart. Because I think once you put that kind of that brand or that idea on it, people think they want to stay within the rules. And that's necessarily the case. I think maybe you can take, you know, a couple ideas from here, take a couple ideas from here, and then see what works for you for, you know, 90% of the time. And then if it means on on a day where you're walking by somewhere and there's the most amazing croissant you've ever seen,
Like, I'm
you
gonna
sit
have that.
down, yeah, you slow down and you enjoy it and you let go of that guilt. But it's when you try to put everything in that diet box is when you really start to have a hard time and you set yourself up for failure either way.
Right.
Yeah, and I think I was gonna say, I think it's the sides of the extreme, just like you were saying with, you experienced extreme measures with like how far you're going into something, whether if it was a sport or, into school, like some people, and I'm guilty of it as well, of just going really to that extreme measure of trying to get the best results from this best type of diet. And then we start to see it almost backfire, or we are just not even paying attention to what are you feeling. We're just kind of blindly following
Right.
that
Mm-hmm.
recipe or diet or what someone else is saying is best for us. But then it's time to kind of, tune back into what we're experiencing. And like you said, that may be seeing yourself wanting a croissant or wanting something that's a little outside of that diet, and that's then you're just following what you feel is best, and what you're actually listening to your body rather than following a certain diet. So I think that's really important to take
Mhm.
note of.
And
Definitely.
it's difficult because I think we mentally, again, you're fighting against what your brain wants. It's so much easier to have that black and white, and you just constantly have to keep up with yourself, saying like, really keep checking in and checking in. And unfortunately, with the diet culture right now, it does want to knock things off, like saying, I was a pastry chef, but I do, at the same time, I'm like, is sugar every day really the best for me? Is processed sugar really what I need for my gut health, for my brain health, for energy wise? And it's like, probably not. But if I want to go down to the bakery and have something wonderful that somebody made with love, hell yeah, I'm going to eat that. Because
Mm-hmm.
what's the other side of it is, you don't have it, you keep thinking about it, you reach for 20 other things to try to fill that void, and then you end up just upset and still wanting it, or binging on other things to try to fill that, instead of just realizing that it's something that your body wants, let it be nourishing, and then move on.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so glad you said that word, because I was just about to say that it seems like that would be a very nourishing type of way to go about how you have a relationship with food, or how it is nourishing your body.
Yeah.
So that's awesome.
But I was going to ask a question. So like when you're just starting out, or when you're working with a client who's just starting out, that, and you were talking about, how you start to break things down and see like what's working for that person, what's not working. What are the tools for someone that hasn't really, maneuvered through their own relationship with food, or like where their patterns are? Like, what would be some suggestions, or do you have like a, something that you would suggest on how they figure out like what works for them or what doesn't? Because sometimes people will be like, well, it made me lose weight, so that works. But you're like, okay, but it did make you lose your weight because you had like diarrhea for a week, and like, you know what I mean, like things like that. Like, yeah, like it's not always necessarily the weight, just the weight issue. So yeah, what would you suggest?
Absolutely. And I think, again, it's that hard line of, usually people think, when they think of diet or they think of food changes, it's not necessarily for their health, unless they've gotten to an extreme point where they need to change what they're eating for their health. They're going down a bad slope, and their doctor's like, hey, if you don't, stop eating this and this, then, you're, aren't going to be doing well in 10 years.
Sure.
And I think that is a important thing to think of first, is instead of looking for the weight loss, it's for how can you start optimally living so that you can start functioning well, so you start feeling better, and then that weight might kind of level off to something where you need to be. And I think for me personally, I first of all want to meet people where they are. I cannot go down to, you know, somebody who has disordered eating or has yo-yo dieted or has listened to it's the same TV show for years and takes what they say for dogma. I can't go and tell them like, just intuitively eat, you know,
Right.
just
Or
go ahead.
like just enjoy that croissant whenever you want it, you know, like
Yeah.
we can understand that,
Yeah.
but
Right. It's
yeah,
just to then say like, no, everything is on the table. You can eat whatever you want. That's not giving anybody tools because they need to do 10 steps before we're getting to that intuitive eating because, you know, I mean, I've said before, if you told me to do that in college, like I would be, you know, very, very unhealthy because my intuition was to eat like, you know, a linebacker
yeah,
and then to restrict like I wasn't, you know, like a child. So I think it's really important first, for me as somebody is coming to me to meet them where they're at. So if somebody has an idea of what they want to do or they basically come. If somebody said to me, you know, I want to be on a meal plan. I want you to tell me what foods to eat. I'm going to meet them where they want to be because that if that's their comfort zone, then that's where we need to start. I'm not going to force anything on somebody. I'm not going to tell them to, you know, push them out of the nest and see what happens.
mhm,
I would rather start where they feel comfortable. And then after about 2 weeks of being on a meal plan, you know, and we're having the same conversations, they're going to get tired of it. You know, they're going to get tired of eating the same things, or they're going to realize that they end up binging anyways.
right.
So for me, I think it's definitely meeting people where they're at. And then the part is to start slowing down, to start really slowing down around meal times, to start asking yourself questions of looking for those hunger cues, because a lot of times, again, we're fed a lot of incorrect information, and it's very hard to let go of some of that. So
Mm,
maybe it's picking a couple foods that you have put in the bad category and like once a week adding those in. Maybe it's just starting to try to take 5 minutes before you eat to really check in, to just slow down. Maybe it's taking 10 breaths. Starting to use those different tools and utilizing different ways to start listening to what your body is saying,
mhm.
I think is a huge help. And especially when we're constantly running around and eating in our cars and just eating to fill, um, we forget that those macronutrients do kind of play a role in how we're feeling. And just for example, you know, if somebody is afraid of eating fat, if they still, you know, it for a long time we thought that it was fat made us fat and it was artery clogging and it's going to give you heart disease and all of these things. If you're not eating fat in your diet, your hormones aren't optimally, you know, functioning. You're
Right.
not going to feel satiated. And so I think looking at the whole picture and then starting to meet people where they're at and then slowly add in tools can really help to kind of heal their relationship with food and themselves at the same time, because you're really going to have to take a step back and pay attention to what's actually going on. What do you actually want right
Yeah. I think that's why I was so drawn to, because I actually came across your stuff first on Instagram, which I love how that is like, so, you know, it's such a connective piece. I know like social media often gets like a bad rap for being like a way that we disconnect, but I've actually met like a lot of really awesome people through it. So, you know, I have like a love-hate relationship with it. But anyway, within, you know, like all of your posts, like all of your, you know, it's not just like a beautiful picture of recipe that you made or, you know, a food or something. Like you always have such a strong message of like nourishment, self-care, of love. Like I really can read so much like that is like who you are and how you're going to receive clients. So, I mean, do you feel that that was coming more from like your own journey of where you had to really work on that self-love, or is that, you know, I already just answered my question. I know that's what happened.
Yeah, well, and it is, and I posted something the other day, and for me as a dietitian who, has people coming to me who want to trust me with something that is so big and so tender in a lot of ways, it's a heavy thing to carry. And I think if I wasn't doing my own work, then I would be doing everybody disservice. And with that comes the fact that like, and I need to be open with the fact that like, I'm on my own journey too. I have, I still have my bad days, and I was told when I was diagnosed with my eating disorder that it was something I would deal with for the rest of my life. And I'm not okay taking that. I'm not okay saying, okay, this is something I'm going to deal with. I want to do whatever I can to keep myself on the path of healing. And through that, I've gained tools. And I think that sometimes I'm writing because it's what I need to hear that day. And it just might connect with other people as well. And again, that's a beautiful piece about Instagram is the ability to share that in, so many characters, and to hopefully at least have one other person connect or one other person understand. And I think there's so much healing in community. And with that, it's okay for people to know that I'm on my own healing journey too. And it just is that maybe I have a couple tools that could help somebody else as well.
100%. I feel like, oh man, that there is just like this, nobody says this, but for some reason, I guess what I internalized for myself when I was going through either like, the trainings that I did or, my education, it's like, once you acquire all of that information, it's like you expect some sort of, and I don't know if this is a woman thing, like a level of perfection, you know? And so to like say that, like your journey has ended and all the things, like I wouldn't trust somebody that was, that came with that approach, to be honest, because that's just like that's not like our human condition. Like we're always learning, like, and probably why you changed careers, and like you wanted to continue to learn about the way to heal and work with people. And so
yeah, I think that's very true. And it's for me, it seems like, I don't know, Hadley, with what we're doing, it's like we're kind of breaking that cycle of needing to and what you're doing, Kaitlin, as well. We're kind of breaking that cycle of giving the answer, like we have the resources, we have the tools, but we're not just giving the answer for them to take and then, learn in that way. We're kind of giving the tool, whether it's a recipe or a word of encouragement to slow down while you're eating or before you're eating, or with, what we're doing with our own practices and our own sharing of that with our own experience. We're kind of breaking that cycle of here's your answer, now take it and put it into your life. It's turning the table of, no, here's the question, and you have to kind of find the answer with the tools that we're giving you. So
yeah,
I appreciate that.
And I'm so glad you mentioned that too, because I feel like it takes the pressure off the teacher to feel like you're supposed to have all the answers.
Right.
It's not possible. It's just not possible. And you would have to like really be, with somebody for years and years and years. And honestly, in a lot of ways, I also think that if you're trying to give the answers, then that person that you're talking to doesn't reap all the benefits of figuring out what it is to actually kind of come up with that answer themselves and to walk that walk. And again, it's like the more tools, great. But then in the end, we all can answer our own questions. It's just, getting to the point where we can slow down enough to answer them and want the answers at the same time.
Yeah. I remember specifically this actually from a yoga teacher that I trained with. And she was like, if I ever if I ever am asking you to put me on a pedestal and if I'm saying that I know all the answers, I'm not your teacher. Like that's not actually what a teacher is. Like a teacher is someone that is like willing to like witness you and see you and also see like, I don't know everything, but this is what I do know. And this is where I can show you. And these are the people you should be in contact with. So that was always such a, because I remember like at that time I was putting her up on this pedestal and she was like, you're amazing. You know all the stuff. Like you're like the best yogi in the wall of the land. And she was like, I am like one of a gazillion. And this is, you know, also someone who's really amazing, which was really helpful for me and something I try to remember to come back to, you know, as a teacher and coach and all that stuff. But
Yeah.
it's tricky. It's tricky.
So much. I mean, and we don't have to get into it, but like the comparison game, because we want to, again, put the people in their boxes or to, you know, see where we level up. And I love that about yoga. And I love that really about any good teacher is they hope and their dreams are for you to surpass them.
Mm-hmm.
And for that to be, you know, like that, they are your stepping stool. And I think that is really memorable for your teacher. And again, is something that as females, we need to keep coming back to of stop trying to put people on pedestals or trying to drop people down, is just to really start to figure out how to lift each other up and to feel the community in that, because we all have some sort of something to teach each other. It's just a matter of they're in different categories and different ways. And the more we can kind of start to open up to that, the better off we'll all be.
Agreed. And I am totally good with going into that comparison conversation because I brought something up as you were talking, you know, within social media and with, you know, the way that wellness is kind of taken storm, and it's like, there's just, you can see so much, like there's green smoothie recipes everywhere. You can look on the internet, you can look on social media, there's built, you know, it's just like surrounding us on how to live this like beautiful, well life. And with even in that, like the comparison of, am I being good enough? Am I being well enough? How many smoothies had I had? Like, again, it can go back into that pattern of like constricting, controlling. So I've had like a lot of the conversation I've been having a lot lately is like when your wellness lifestyle actually becomes a lifestyle of being completely unwell, you know, when you're like, so you're so focused on being well that it's actually then like turns against you. So do you have experience with that? Do you have just thoughts on it? I mean, you're like, yeah.
I do. I think because it's in any industry, and I think it's wonderful that people are becoming so much more aware of wellness and things that they can do to better themselves. But of course, within any industry that starts to get saturated, you start to have that kind of patriarchal effect of, you know, people trying to like up their game, compare, up their game.
Mm-hmm.
And if we keep moving in that direction, we're all just going to feel like we're not living up to, you know, our own expectations or the wellness expectations. And I definitely feel that, you know, I feel that still, you know, if I have a couple too many drinks on the weekend and I don't feel great the next day, or, you know, when I still question myself and my intuition, when I'm like, come on, because you see and you read and you take in all of this stuff. And then our brains are still wired to use that in a lot of ways against us. And like the social media, it can be a, you know, two-edged sword.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so much easier to, again, live in the black and white. And the wellness can turn into a black and white thing as well. And it's just not, because it's not cookie cutter, and you don't have to use every single adaptogen and juice cleanse and, you know, sit for 3 hours and meditate a day. Like that's just not possible for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So it's figuring out what works for you by, instead of consuming, turning that inside and seeing what works for you, and then being able to cut it off when you realize that you're over consuming.
Right.
Which I know is hard for people like us when, you know, a lot of times Instagram is how we use marketing, or, you know, it's a free resource, which is great. but what is that level of you're consuming to fill something, and you need to just like cut it off and realize like this is no longer helping the cause.
Right.
Yeah.
I will say that the iPhone update that tells you how much you're on your phone, do you guys have that?
Ooh, yeah. That
I updated my phone. I can
little
find that.
Girl. Okay. So yeah, it's under settings. And like, I think I got it the first week when they did the update, but it sent me, it was like a Sunday, and it told me like it broke it down. It breaks it down between like, social media, your
Wow.
apps, productivity, like the apps that use that type of stuff. And I mean, we use social media for a business. So I had to kind of like add that number in there a little bit, but it is like, it's amazing. And to think, like, I saw that number, I was like, whew, that's a lot. It's a lot of time on there. And how
Yeah.
much of that was just like mindlessly scrolling, looking at other people's stuff. And then from that mindless place was there, did I go into the comparison? Did I go into like it's a tricky,
It's a dangerous game for sure, but I
dangerous
feel like
game.
it is. It's a dangerous game to just scroll and scroll and scroll. But I feel like there's a fine balance between like we can, be aware of ourselves, because there's people that are just so completely engulfed and not aware of themselves.
Mhm.
So there's like this fine pendulum that swings far over to that side where we're just not aware of what we're doing, not aware of where we are. But then if we swing too far to the other side where we're super aware and we're super controlling of ourselves and like everything we're eating, it's just like, well, those are still so far apart from somewhere where we're a little bit of both. And I feel like that's what at least, we try to strive for, is like that balance of a little bit of reflection with also a little bit of action to bring us into like some sort of balance. And I feel like sometimes that's looking at ourselves, but also like in being involved in our community and
Yeah.
feeling, that sense of purpose and nourishment and in other ways that we can fuel ourselves. But I feel like that's going into so many other little topics. But it just shows that we can chat a lot about other stuff here. But
Right.
Kaitlin, I wanted to ask you about how you feel, like what are you feeling nourished about right now? Whether it's a type of food or like how are you feeling nourished for yourself?
Yeah. Right now, food wise, I am grateful that it's actually, like we were talking about before, it went from 90 to 40 degrees in a week.
Mm-hmm.
And that takes food wise to kind of like catch up, because you're looking at all the pumpkin and everything that's going on, and it's still 90, and it's really not what sounds good at the time.
No.
So right now, what is nourishing me food wise, I am, and again, this goes back to, this is what sounds good for me intuitively, but I am on the ghee train. So I think it's wonderful for fall. I think it's so nourishing. I've been adding it into my drinks. I've been putting it on, different food. And for me, it quiets down those, kind of demons in my head still that say like, you're eating butter, you're eating butter, right? But my body feels so good with it, that's starting to be something I'm really trying to listen to. And again, it's a journey, but that's definitely a nourishing aspect for sure.
Well, it
Other
makes
things,
sense too. I was going to say, sorry not to cut you off, but like, going into those colder months, for people who don't know what ghee is, I mean, but do you make your own ghee or do you buy it?
I bought it.
Do you bought it? Yeah.
But yeah, for me, just time wise right now, it is worth the, a jar will last me a couple weeks anyways, but
Totally.
yeah, but it's such an amazing product. And for me, I'm actually, a little bit, I have to be very careful with dairy. So because it is mostly free of lactose, it's something that I like, my body is just so happy to have right now.
Yeah.
And with the warmer weather or the colder weather, it's just, it nourishes in ways that, fat-free things just aren't. You just need to start like kind of settling down and kind of finding what those comforting foods are for you.
Yeah, those warming liquids, a little bit more moisture, like skin starting to get dry, having like, that ghee and our coconut oil and all of that good stuff. Like I love almond oil during the winter time. Maybe not always cooking, but like on my body because it has that warming property to it. So totally
Absolutely.
makes sense.
And I think for, away from food too, it's, for me, what I'm starting to realize with this business part and, just self-work is, finding the moments to slow down and to read, and being selfish about my time in the morning has been very nourishing for me. So whether that's getting up a couple minutes early or just setting, as an entrepreneur, I can set up my day. So using that first hour to not even look at my phone. The alarm goes off and my phone goes to the side. Making my matcha tea in the morning and sitting there silently for a little bit and then doing some reading and journaling. And that has been amazingly therapeutic. And really just starting my day with that slow down intention and especially gratitude, has been a huge shift in something that again just fills my cup, which is so important.
That's awesome.
It's nice to fill your cup in many ways, and especially in the morning. I know a lot of people don't have that time, and for a long time I didn't either. It's mostly like wake up and rush out the door with a banana in your hand, and you're lucky if you have a banana or a granola bar. But having that time in the morning, oh my gosh, it's incredible. Like I'm starting that back up again as well, and it's just like a game changer.
Yeah.
Just to have that space to like slow it down, and you're not carrying that with you like into your morning, that rushing feeling. I mean, shit happens. You feel rushed during the day usually, but at least you've had that time to ground yourself. So I love that you're feeling nourished in that way, and it's great.
Yeah. And I think it's such a cool thing. And, again, it's nice to have the opportunity to have that time in the morning, but it's also figuring out then again what works for you. And if it's not the morning, then maybe it's 5 minutes right when you get in your car, or right after work, taking 5 minutes just to literally sit and turn on the music or breathe. Or it doesn't have to be always, because I think it's again easy to look at that wellness and think I'm not doing enough because I'm not finding that time in the morning. But it's more the idea of figuring out times during the day where you can get that nourishment. That's so important.
I agree. I was going to say also, like, it can be, not feeling like you have that morning time available. Or, like, oh, well, my life doesn't look like this, so therefore I'm not going to even start. Like that can be a hindrance for people, saying like, oh, well, I have kids, I have to wake up really early in the morning. So it's not always about like having the time, but like, how do you make like these little increments of time? So I feel like it's more intentional with your time, with your space, with your body. It's like really, giving yourself that opportunity to connect in. So then you have those moments that really are more meaningful. So yeah.
Absolutely. And or finding the moments too that, if you don't have a lot of extra time, how can, your shower in the morning, how can you make that more meditative? How can you
Yep.
make that more nourishing? Maybe you buy some essential oils or rub, again, the almond oil on yourself in the morning, and that can take 30 seconds. And it's just finding those little pockets that just really do start to change your day, and start to change the thought patterns as well.
I am finding a pocket right now and giving my legs a massage as we talk, because I realize that I'm so sore
Finding the time.
from this workout that I did. And like, I'm just like, damn, so all of this self-care nourish talk, I'm like, I'm gonna nourish myself in this moment.
Right now.
Yes.
Yeah. I was gonna ask Kaitlin, if someone's wanting to like start super small, like, it's fall, we're starting to get into like our soup and warm food season. If someone is just kind of at like a very small starting point with wanting to get started. Maybe they've tried like Whole30 or they've tried like paleo, but it's not sticking. What is something like a small step you would give them for advice to just start small?
Mm-hmm. I would probably say this for any season. I think one of the most important things, first of all, I would say is water.
That's what I was gonna
Yeah. It is so interesting. It's a habit, you know, it has to be a habit, drinking water. And it's something that is so important for our bodies to function optimally, that it doesn't necessarily always mean taking something out. Sometimes it's adding in. And if if you're not used to drinking water, maybe it's just substituting 1 glass a day of what you usually do, or adding one more, you know, cup at night or in the morning, just starting yourself off with 1 glass of water. That would probably be my first thing. And then the second thing is, in addition to, is trying to get a little bit extra vegetables and fruit in. Honestly, just starting to bring it back to those whole foods, getting some micronutrients back in your system with vegetables. It can be, you know, maybe it's just adding a little bit to your breakfast, or blending it into a smoothie, or, you know, adding an extra serving, hiding it somewhere in your family's dinner, you know, at night. It doesn't always have to be something that is taking away. And I think sometimes that's our first kind of line of what to go to. And again, where we kind of get it set up for failure. So how can you find other ways to add things in that will help nourish your body first, and maybe help out your cells a little bit, so that you're not craving things that maybe you don't necessarily need because you're depleted in other areas.
Nice. Yeah.
Those are great suggestions. And I also say, like, adding on to the water part, you know, I don't know, I feel like I read a statistic of this one time, but, or like percentage of, you know, when you think that you're actually hungry, like, you know, X amount of times it's actually, you know, thirst, like you're dehydrated. And so just by having that glass of water, you know, first, and then when you're ready to eat, like, see how that feels, like going back to that, like, how did that make me feel? Like, am I still as hungry and as ravenous as I thought I was? Or did I just need to have a drink of water first? And then I can have maybe like a smaller portion of something. So I know for me, like, that's changed, you know, my eating habits dramatically, because I wasn't getting enough water, simply was not getting enough liquids and water in my daily routine. So yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. Now I have to add on one more, because
Of course.
that too, I would say a habit, without even having to do with the food or liquids we're consuming, would just be to slow down.
Nice. Yeah.
Going over to Europe, it was, again, like, it was fascinating as an American to sit there and watch, you know, people take 2-3 hours for a meal, and to slow down and to actually, like, take a bite and put their fork down. And since we are always rushing, how are your hunger cues possibly going to kick in if they're not even given time, you know, to process the food that's in your system? So being able to just not eat less, not whatever, just slow down while you're eating. And give your body the time to digest what it needs to, and just to see what happens.
That's great. I fully suggest that as well. And I need to remind myself on the constant, because I am like the fastest eater in town. Even if I have like all the time in the world, I still am just like gobble, 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 gobble.
Yeah.
But yeah, taking that time to slow, it's definitely made my digestion like a ton better when I do slow down. So yeah, I agree. All right, girl. So before we wrap things up here, if somebody is wanting to work with you, I mean, what types of things are you offering right now? Like, what services are wrapped in your dietitian, pastry chef, yogi wheelhouse? And then are we throwing some like synchronized swimming in there at the end? Like, is that part of it too?
I can be hired.
Yeah.
I haven't touched a pool in years, so it would be bad. But so a lot of options right now. I definitely wanted to go into it and see what I loved the most. And it's a little bit just kind of feeling my way through and seeing what people connect to, what I connect to, and what people need in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
So my biggest thing is the one-on-one coaching and counseling. So being able to work one-on-one with somebody to go more in depth with what their goals are, what they're going for, and not just food is obviously the basis of it, but again, back to that wellness as a whole and getting more in touch with who we are as individuals, and just starting to try to empower both men and women, but it'll probably be more women, I'm sure, would be the biggest thing. So the one-on-one counseling, I also right now have options for with that more like macronutrient based. So the macros for me was a journey that helped lead me to intuitive eating with a little bit of structure. And again, like we talked about before, I don't want to throw somebody into the deep end if they're not ready. I want to be able to put tools on there that hopefully they find a little bit more palatable that can kind of help them along the line of getting to that spot where they feel more confident about making their own food choices. And then I also have for people in the Cincinnati area, I have like boutique catering. So again, with the pastry experience and just I love cooking, being able to cook for like small groups of people for retreats. I'm doing a couple of different friends' weddings and things like that. I definitely like keeping that option open just so that because my part of my love language is feeding people. So, whether it's healthy or not healthy, it's I love being able to kind of open that up and to share that that passion with people as well.
That's awesome. I relate to that so much. I just like food has always cooking. The kitchen is just like the heart of, of my house, cooking for people and entertaining that way, whether it's like for 4 people or like, 30 people, it brings me a lot of joy. So, and I also really want you to like cater an event that we do or like a future retreat, because again, like we're looking at all of your recipes. I'm like, I want to eat that. And I want to eat that. And I want to eat that. Yeah.
Drooling for sure. That would be amazing.
Yes. Sweet. So your website is the same as your Instagram handle, right? A Life Nourished.
Yep. So the website is a Life Nourished -RD.
Okay.
It's the only addition. Yeah.
Cool.
So -RD.com.
And then A Life Nourished at Instagram, which everybody should go follow so they can also drool all over all of your pictures. And thank you so much for talking with us. This has been really lovely.
You guys, so much fun.